All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Pei Dalid. We will first learn a Mishnah that will clarify which parts of the Korban Pesach is considered meat. In other words, every registrant needs to have at least one kazayis designated for him or for her. And we're going to see that there are indeed certain parts of the animal that are not considered basar. And there are other parts of the animal, obviously, that is considered basar. How is that determined? We're going to have at least the initial machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan is going to hold basar hashta azlinon, that you view things the way they are right now. Reish Lakish says basar soif azlinon, that you look at things or you follow their final state. It's very much connected to Rabbi Yochanan being a tzaddik, Reish Lakish being a Baal Tshuva, as we'll speak out. And then we will see that the Rabbi Yochanan agrees with Reish Lakish that basar soif azlinon. And we'll propose, when we're learning the Gemara, perhaps the pnimius of that retraction of Shitas Rabbi Yochanan. Then we're going to have another Mishnah. In the other Mishnah, we're going to learn that if a person allows any part of the Korban Pesach to be left over, in other words, we allowed the Pesach to become noiser, this is a violation. However, there is no malchus. We'll see in the Gemara two reasons. Why is there no malchus? Normally, when you violate a negative commandment, you should get malchus. Then the Mishnah is going to tell us the other din, that whenever we break a bone of a Korban Pesach that's tamei, there is also no malchus. And this is a topic that we already spoke about recently. We're going to learn in a Braisa, the Chachamim, the Tanach there brings the pasuk ve'etzem loy sishberu boy, that what's that boy which is extra to emphasize that only if the animal is kosher, boy bekosher, then you're chayiv malchus for ve'etzem loy sishberu. But if the animal is tamei or puzzle, then you won't be chayiv malchus. And then Rabbeinu HaKadosh Rebbe brings another source for the same halacha. Rebbe doesn't argue with the halacha, but he's doirish a smuchin. The pasuk juxtaposes, as we'll learn in the Gemara, eating and the isur of a etzem leisish berubay, only things that are roy la'achila, is a part of an animal for which you chayiv malchus if you break a bone. A part of the animal that is not ro'ui la'achila, you won't be chayiv malchus. Again, it's the same conclusion, which is, as we learned in the Mishnah, that you're not going to be chayiv malchus for breaking a bone of a Pesach that's tamei. And the Gemara is going to wonder what will be the practical difference between the Tanakama and Rebbe in the Braisa, and we're going to learn no less than 8 different nafkaminas. That's going to be the bulk of the entire daf, and through it we're going to learn very, very interesting dinim. Like, for example, the issur of a breaking a bone is limited to the part of the Pesach that's designated for human consumption. The part of the Pesach that is designated to go on the Mizbeach, there is no issur of breaking its bone. We're going to learn another very interesting machloikas, at least according to Tosfos, according to Rabbi, as we'll learn. What happens if there is a limb that part of it has a kazayis, there's a kazayis on a part of it, and there's another part of a bone that has no kazayis of basar on it. And the person, for whatever reason, wants to break the bone in the area where there is no kazayis on it. Are you going to be chayiv malchus or not? Rabbi Yochanan says that you are subject to this prohibition. Reish Lakish holds that in that area, you look at that specific area, you're not going to be chayiv malchus, and many other beautiful ideas, primarily all about the isur of shviras ha'etzem. Let's start on Daf Pei Daled Amud Aleph. We left off on top of the Amid by the Mishnah 3 lines on top of the Amid. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'ar kol nehim v'dvarim. Okay, so Chevra, every registrant needs to have at least a kazayis that they will consume for them to be able to join in that korban. Now we're going to learn what parts of the korban is considered basar for you to be able to count it for anyone's kazayis. Says the Mishnah, Kol hanechol b'shoir hagadol, gavaldik. Any part of the animal that's edible, even in large ox. Obviously, an ox is not fit for a Korban Pesach, but we have to appreciate that there are certain animal parts that are soft and edible when the animal is smaller. Certainly, if the animal type is a small animal type, tzoin, flocks. And then you have other parts of the animal that when the animal grows, or if this part is in an ox, in a larger animal, it becomes hard, it becomes inedible. So the Mishnah says, Pashut, any animal part, again, the Pesach has to be a kid, right, or a lamb. But if this part would have been in an ox, it would have been edible, then ye'achel begedi harach. Then that is a part of the animal in the gedi or in the lamb that you can count as a kezayis basar. L'cha'ura, what the Mishnah is trying to imply is that if you have a part of the animal that is soft right now because it's in the lamb, because it's in the goat, don't forget that they have to be within their first year. But this same animal part, if it would have been in a shoyd, it would be hard. Then, even though this is edible in the lamb, this is edible in the gedi, it's not going to be valid. L'cha'ura, that is what the Mishnah is saying. Kama. And now comes the challenge. That's a Rebbe keeping us on our toes. Then he says that the Rashi Kinofayim, that the ends of the shoulder blades, now really the ends of the shoulder blades become cartilage, but it's bone that turns into cartilage. Or stam, v'hasechusim, or any pieces of cartilage that are not connected to the bones. What? He doesn't say. That is good, that's not good. It's mamash not clear. So we're going to begin with the Gemara. Rabbi understood that final line in a way that it mamash contradicted the opening line of the Mishnah. So Rabbi pointed out the following contradiction. Tanan, our Mishnah opens up, that's the criterion. Any animal part that if, even when it is in the large ox, it's still edible, it's softish, then only that type of part of the animal may be eaten, bigdi harach, and it can be counted as a kazayis basar. However, but that's the implication. If there is a part that's edible here in the Pesach, but this same part in the large animal would become hard, would be inedible, ema seifa. The Mishnah is concluding that the Rashi Kinofayim, that the ends of the shoulder blades and any bahasechusim and any cartilage l'chu'ura is okay. The problem is, yes, these Rashi Kinofayim, cartilage in a young lamb, in a young goat and a kid is taka edible, but for hahani lo misachli b'shoyd hagadol, but they in the large ox become hard, become inedible. L'chayda, the Mishnah is contradicting itself. So Ella, look at Rabba's solution. Rabba saying that really the Mishnah is recording two opinions, Tanoihi and Vahachi Ketani. Rabbi in the Mishnah brings both opinions. Opinion number one is Kol Hanechel B'Sher Hagadol, only that Yei Ochel B'Gdi Hadach, which means V'She'enoi Nechel Loi. However, but there's another opinion, and they hold that for Rashi Kinofayim, even the ends of the shoulder blades, Vahasechusim and the cartilage, that these are animal parts that are not edible when they are in an ox. But right now, the way they are in the goat, the way they are in the lamb, they're soft. And therefore, this Tanach holds that they could count towards the kazayis. That's one way of learning the Mishnah. Rava says nisht. Rabbeinu HaKadosh is not quoting two shitas, there's one shita. And Mahain Ketani, the Sefer of the Mishnah is clarifying the Reisha of the Mishnah. Vahachi Ketani. He wants to add a nuance. Kol hanechel b'shor hagadol b'shulaka gavaldik. When we speak about, you know what's meat, only if that in the large animal is edible. It doesn't have to be edible stum. Even if you can only make it edible by cooking it for an extended period of time, but if you make the shulaka, if you do extensively cook it, it will be edible. That is also considered a part of the animal that you can count towards the kazayis basan. Is yachal b'gdi harach bitzli. Even though if you were to roast it in the ox, it would be inedible, doesn't matter. Since there is a way to make it edible in the shoyer, in the Koren Pesach, which we have to roast it, that's the only way, and it's edible because it's a young animal, is oichet good. What will be a great example? The Rashi Kinofayim, v'hasechusim, that in a gedi or in a lamb, even roasting it makes it edible. In a large ox, the only way to make it edible is to extensively cook it, but there's oichet good, because at least through extensively cooking it, you can make it edible. But if there will be an animal part in the shiur hagadol, that even if you were to cook it for a long time, it would still remain inedible, that animal part is not considered the kazayis basar in the gedi or in the lamb. And the Gemara says, Tanya Kavasa de Rava, that it's not a machloikas. If I care to make the Mishnah one shita and for it to flow, you have to add that detail, that leniency of allowing us to extensively cook it b'shoir hagadol. And as I state, that kol hanechal b'shoir hagadol, even though you need to do shulaka, good enough. Yeyachel b'gdei arach b'tzli umahei. What will be a great example? Rashi kenofayim v'haser chusim. And now we're adding another detail in this baraisa. V'gidin harakin, and sinews that are soft, nidnoinim kebasar, they are regarded as flesh. Continuing with the way we're learning the Mishnah, all this is the Mishnah with Rashi. There are other Rishonim that learned this whole sugya in Gans and different. But let's go over here. That certain sinews, we learned that yesterday, are very hard. Okay, they don't count for the basa. But as long as they are soft, even though maybe people normally would not eat it for nourishment, it's a sinew, doesn't matter. If it's edible and has a din of basar, and if all you got was a kazayis of those gidden, you're good. You fulfilled your mitzvah of Koren Pesach. Now let's go further on that. Itmar it was stated, gidden, if you have sinews, eventually they'll become hard. Again, the animal of a Koren Pesach is young; it's within its first year. Right now, you can eat it. This part will become hardened. So we have a machloikas. Rabbi Yechanan says, Nimnin alayim bepesach. And actually, Rabbi Yechanan is saying that this is what the Braisa means. When the Braisa says that Gidin Harakin, like why did the Braisa mention that? When the Braisa began speaking about the part, that's if in the ox, if you can at least cook it extensively, it's good. That's a leniency. It's even though you need to cook it extensively in the ox, good enough, it's called basar. Then the Braisa gave another leniency, that if you have sinews, if now they are edible, I don't care if later they will become hard when the animal grows. That's called basar hashto azlin. And you look at the present. No, unlike the cartilage, the cartilage, when it is in a large ox, even in a large ox, at least through extensively cooking it, you can make it edible. When these sinews become hard, even in the large ox, it remains inedible. So even though now it's soft, it's not good. And the way the Gemara words their machlekes, Rabbi Yechanan says nimnan aleim because basar hashtos linon. We look at the present. Ishlakish amad ein nimnan aleim because basar besoif as linon. But you look at what will follow, and l'chora Rabbi Yechanan is the tzaddik, and the tzaddik, the present is great. The whole koyach of the Baal Tshuva comes from the concept of basar soif as linon. Because if a person looks at their current state and they're not yet good, what will inspire them to become better? By understanding that we should define ourselves not on who I am right now, but on whom I could be. That is the motivation. The future is the motivation for tshuva. Now, we'll come back to that in a moment. So, frag the Gemara, Eisvei Reish Lakish to Rabbi Yechanan. It says in a Braisa, Kol hanechal b'shoir hagadol yiyachar b'gdei harach. Umahein, that's the way Rabbi learned our Mishnah. Even the Rashi Kenofayim, even the Haser Chusim. Frag the Gemara, hold on. Hani in L'cho'ura, the Braisa means to say, like we just explained, only these, like we mentioned, at least when you cook them in the shoir hagadol extensively, you make them soft. Avol gidim shesoifam lahakshois. And by the way, not only are these gidim, when they are in the ox, so hard that even through extensive cooking, it's inedible, even in the lamb, even in the goat, even in a behema daka, when these animals become older, at a certain point, they become mamish inedible. And l'chora, that should not be qualified as basar. So Amalei, so says Rabbi Yechanan, to Reish Lakish, you're not learning the right implication. You're not making the correct inference from the Braisa. Tani hani v'uadil hanoch. No, the Braisa gave one example, but it's not excluding this. Hani maitama do hamisachli b'shoir hagadol b'shlaka. So hanoch nami misachli b'shoir hagadol b'shlaka. And this is not a machlokes and metzias. You have to appreciate these arguments in the Gemara. In other words, what did Reish Lakish think? Reish Lakish felt that when you cook these sinews extensively, it's not as edible as the cartilage. Rabbi Yochanan felt it's good enough. So what point in the Metzias is it halachically considered edible or not? L'chora, that's the machlokes. Okay. Says the Gemara, Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah le Rabavin. I have a problem on this whole machlokes. And when you're going to meet the great Rabbabohu, he'll resolve it for me. That kiyoslos lekami the Rabbabohu. Ramile, point out the following stira. Me, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that gidin shesoifam lahakshois. Nevertheless, nimnim aleim bepesach. Why? Alma basar hashta azlinan. I got a problem. This is a sugya we have in Chulin regarding oir horoish shel egel harach, the hide of a head of a young calf. Now, in Chulin, we're speaking about the following. Something that is classified halachically as food is susceptible to becoming tamei, with all of the dinim. Something that's not food, and it's not yet a keli, stop. It's not even susceptible to becoming tamei. The head, the skin, the hide of the head of a young calf is soft. While we learned over there, while the calf is still nursing, then you can eat the skin of the head. Now it's food. But the moment the calf stops nursing, even when it was still within the year, even when it's still called an egel, an egel, you have a para, then it becomes hardened. So it's very similar to our question, do we qualify it as food or not? Will really depend, basar hashta it's food, or basal soif. And when that question was asked from Rabbi Yochanan, V'amar loi, Rabbi Yochanan responded, ein metama. Ein metama, that it's not susceptible. Guys, right now, it's edible. So Rabbi Yochanan's psak din over there in Chulin, fakert, was predicated on even Rabbi Yochanan subscribing to the concept of basar soif ozlinan. So Allah basar bisoif ozlinan. Rabbi Yochanan contradicted himself. So Amalei, so Rabbi Bo, who heard the question, rebutted, said back, the Rami Lach, the one who asked you this question, I know it's not yours, whoever sent you to ask me this question, it says Alashim. He did not look at what he was grinding. You know, when you're grinding, you want to grind good kernels. You don't want to grind to begin with something of inferior quality. So you're trying to ask Akasha metateret, you're not looking well at the source. That's a good expression. You're not looking well at the source because and if I get to the whole Gemara in Chulin, if Rashi goes through the details, Chulin Ayin Zayin, it becomes clear that there is a Mishnah that seemed to imply when Rabbi Yochanan responded, Ein metama, because basar b'soif azlinan, there is a Mishnah there that implied basar hashta. And you should know that Rabbi Yochanan tells Reish Lakish, Al takniteni, don't irritate me by quoting me a Mishnah that seems to be saying basar hashta, because Shebeloshen Yachid Ani Shoina Oisa, that Mishnah is only a Das Yachid, and I don't agree with that. And as we learned in Chulin, that initially Rabbi Yochanan learned the Mishnah in Chulin, he understood that Mishnah to be the Chachamim. That Mishnah was the one that said Basar Hashta Zlin, and so initially he paskin Basar Hashta. During that phase, when it comes to our topic, Reish Lakish says that these Gidin, even though Shosoifon Lahakshois, Nimnem Aleim B'Pesach, initially there was a machlokes. But later when Rabbi Yochanan discovered that Mishnah in Chulin, upon which he based the concept of Basar Hashta, is only B'Loshen Yachid and Yishayna Ois, it's a Das Yachid, Dafke Nat Rabim, Rabbi Yochanan changed his mind. And Rabbi Yochanan holds Basar B'Soif Azlinam, which means that what you quoted Rabbi Yochanan from Chulin, that Rabbi Yochanan says, Ein Metama, that stands. Ein Metama, because later the hide of the head will be inedible. But Rabbi Yochanan changed his opinion over here. Rabbi Yochanan agrees now with Reish Lakish that the Gidin, Shesoifim Lahakshois, Ein Nimnem Aleim B'Pesach. It's taka worse than the cartilage that at least through extensive cooking can become good. But B'chlal, to know that Rabbi Yochanan at the end also holds that Basar B'Soif was linen. Now perhaps Al Pi Chasidus, even though that we mentioned Tzaddik Bal Tshuva, that for sure Bal Tshuva has to be future oriented. But another theme we have a lot in Chassidus, that one of the one of the novelties that Mashiach will bring into the world, that I've quoted a lot to Zajac, that Mashiach asad le'isava tzadikaya b'tiyufta, which means that the Mashiach will teach even a tzaddik to become a Baal Tshuva. You know, it's the way of living of however good a person is right now, but never define yourself as how am I right now. That's not who you are. You are who you could be, and we can always be better. And that's a avodah even for a tzaddik. So it's beautiful. So even Reish Lakish, initially he didn't need to have this future oriented because the present was good. But then there is the Maila L'basoif that even Rabbi Yochanan is moide that L'basar B'soif Azlina. Okay. Now, Chavra, from here until the end of the daf, it looks big. It's very easy. It's like almost a vacation, a break. Like we mentioned, there is a din that no one debates. And we mentioned the din yesterday with nuances. Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Shimon, the Tanach, that the law of breaking the bone of a Pesach doesn't go in all scenarios. Generally, if the Pesach is not okay, a general statement, then if you break the bone, you're not going to be chayiv malchus. But the Mishnah begins with another din. But we're going to focus primarily on the second one. Din number 1, says the Mishnah. Oh, don't forget, if you break a bone in the carbon Pesach, Tor means it's okay, it's not tamei, it's edible, it's fit. Then harei loy karboim. A unique din. The Torah writes in Parshas Boy, ve'etzem loy sishberu boy. By other kachim, you don't have such a love. Forget the other kachim, you have bones that has marrow in them. You have to break the bone to eat up the marrow to make sure it doesn't become nicer. By the Pesach, those bones that have marrow in them, they will become nicer. There's nothing you can do. Avol, however, says the Mishnah to dinim, if a person does leave over even a Pesach that should have been eaten, that is edible, that's kosher, that's tahar. No, it's a person allowed the Pesach to become nicer. The Torah says, normally when you violate a law, you chayiv malchus. Here you won't be chayiv malchus. For allowing meat to become nicer, even b'tor, no malchus. Din number 2, if a person breaks the bone of a Pesach, that's tamei, that's the example of the Mishnah of an unfit carbon. Also, eino loika esor boim. The lav, the etzem leisishburu boy, is only bekasher, boy bekasher, and not the pas. Nekuda. So let's start. So we're going to focus on not the first opening statement of the Mishnah, but the 2 dinim, where you're not chayiv malchus. So bishlam and moisiv, even b'tohar, that you're not chayiv malchus. Why is that? We're going to have your machlokes tanoim. The Tanyas we learned in the Brayso. And the first Tana, Rabbi Yehuda, this would be what you would call a classical lav shenitak le'esei. God says, don't do X, Y, and Z. And then Hashem says, and if you did it, the way you remedy it is by doing something else. For example, God says, don't steal. Then the Torah says, if one stole, return what you stole with the details. Oh, so since the Torah says what you should do, which is to burn it, so the Torah is giving you an assay after the lois. It's a loimer to tell you she'ein loike divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, the assay, it remedies. It gives you a tikkun for the lav. So why would you need malchus? The Torah never punishes. The Torah is coming here to remedy. It's bringing you a kapara. You don't need a kapara. You fulfill the assay. Says Rabbi Yaakov, loy min Hashem huzeh. No, that this is not a lav shenitik la'aseh. Actually, Bekitzer, going back to what we learned just previously, that Rabbi Yaakov holds that the whole pasuk that writes is not an asay. Remember the whole din that the Torah repeats that boiker sheni to tell you this chiddush. That was the whole thing we learned yesterday. Normally you would think that you have to burn it on Yom Tov. Right? Even though Rav Ashi brought the Shabbosin, and he says Shabbosin is an essay, it's not so simple. Shabbosin can mean not to violate the lavim. Shabbosin, you can also be understood, don't do things that are not Shabbosdik. Don't do things that are not Yom Tovdik. Right? Shabbosin, Shvus comes from Shabbosin. But it doesn't go on the lavim. It's only a lav. The whole pasuk is coming to teach you boiker sheni. Don't burn it on Yom Tov. Anyway, so it's not for that. Elo. Why do you not get malchus? Another klal. Whenever we violate God's will, God forbid, but through a inaction, how do you make noiser? Right? A person eats chazer by eating it. He did an action. Nice it is, you did not eat it. So when you violate Hashem's will by inaction, it's, so to say, considered a lesser violation, for which you don't need malchus. The aim like an olive. Okay, so whichever shita you approach, we understand the reason behind the first exception in the Mishnah. Ella, the second din in the Mishnah, the final din in the Mishnah, that a person breaks the bow of a Pesach that's tamei, minolon. How do you know that you're not chayiv malchus? Maybe you are chayiv malchus. The Amakra and for the Gemara, since it says ve'esem loisishberu boy, and the word boy is extra. Ve'etzem loisishberu klor boy, excluding boy, only boy bekasher boy bepasul. Zayir good. Okay, and now, and by the way, just to quickly chazer, one at least, that yesterday we had the machlokes, Tanakama, Rabbi Yaakov, and Abshimon, just to quote Rabbi Yaakov and Abshimon. So Rabbi Yaakov was the one that said that when do we say loy b'pasul? Only if it never had a shas hakoisher. If the Pesach had a shas hakoisher, if there was a time that it was, even though now it's not edible, you're going to be chayiv. Rabbi Shimon was the Tana that was the most lenient, echad zeh ve'echad zeh. If right now, for whatever reason, you may not eat it, it's possible, you're not chayiv malchus for breaking the bone. Okay. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan. Tana Rabbanan ve'etzem le'sishberu boy. Here the Tana. Boy bekasher v'loy bepasul, from the extra word boy. Rabbi Oimer, same halacha, different source. Since in the same pasuk it says "B'bayis echad yei ochel," in the Zajac, eat it in the same home. You got to eat it together. We'll learn many dinim about that soon. And it's juxtaposed to that. Ve'etzem le'sishberu boy. So from the juxtaposition says Rabbi, kol roi lachila yei ochel, something that's ra'oi fit to be consumed. Yesh by mishum shviras ha'etzem. She'ein roi lachila ein by mishum shviras ha'etzem. So normally, again, you can have machlokes. Mashma is darshan ike beinayu. We try not to say that. What will be a practical difference? And again, we're going to learn 8. Now, not everyone agrees to all the 8, but there's going to be 8 different approaches pointing out a nafkamina between the Tanakh and Rabbi. My beinayu. We're going to give numbers to them that will make it clearer later. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, the first one, the only one on Amud Aleph. Approach number 1 is Pesach haba b'tumah. Haba b'tumah means the community is tamei. Roif tzibur is tamei. Roif kahanim, or old kahanim, are tamei. The klei shadasin are tamei. And let's go with the shita that tuma the chuya b'tzibur. Remember those words. So ike benayu man the amar kasher. That's the Tanakh of the Braisa. Chavra daf pei dalod amid beis. He says, well, if the lav is only to break a bone from a kasher, even though the Torah allows us to bring the Pesach b'tumah, because tumah the chuya b'tzibur, but it's called a puzzle, and therefore a leniency. If someone breaks a bone during that year, they're not going to be chayiv malchus. It's bepuzzle. It can be brought, but it's called puzzle. No, Rabbeinu HaKadosh Rebbe said in the Braisa, he didn't say the words puzzle. He said it's from the smichos of babayis echad yei ochel. Roy lachila, it's roy lachila. It's the choya. The Torah allows us to eat it. We're obligated to eat it. Laman da'amar roy lachila, Rebbe hanami roy lachilahu. In other words, according to the first, we'll just give numbers. According to the first approach, Rebbe is the machmer. Rebbe is going to say you will be chayiv malchus even when Pesach is coming, the tumah. Says Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef, I'm a key high gav. No, I disagree with you. The kula alma ein b'mishum shura so'etzem. Rebbe will agree with the Tanakh as well. In other words, Rebbe doesn't argue that from the word boy, which is extra, we learn boy bekasher, v'loy bepasul. And therefore, if we're going to go with Tumah D'chuya, and the Tanakh holds that you're not chayiv, Rebbe will also agree that you're not chayiv. Rebbe gives another limud to exclude other scenarios from Malchus. Rebbe is being makel. Rebbe is limiting the lav even more. He's not going away from the Tanakh. He's the Tanakh plus. The Rebbe la'akulika asa. And if boy bekasher v'loy b'pasul excludes the lav from a Pesach haba b'tumah because we are viewing it as tumah d'choy b'tzibur, hi v'ha hi pasalu tumah d'choy, Rebbe will also hold that you're not chayiv malchus. So here we go, Rabbi Yosef, approach number 2. Ella says the Gemara, we just quoted before Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon. That is their machlokes. Ikebenayu, Laman da Omar Kasher, the Tanakama. Ha Kasher who? Since it was Kasher, even though now it's not Kasher, you are still going to be Chayiv Malkis. And Rabbi agrees to that limud, but now he adds another leniency. So Rabbi is more lenient, and Rabbi will go like Rab Shimon. That is exactly what Rab Shimon said. Now we understand the underlying machlokes between Rabbi Yaakov and Rab Shimon, whether you're Dorsh and Smuchin or not. Next, Abaya Omar Oichetnisht. I disagree with you with Rabbi Yosef. I disagree with approach number 2. Because how do you know that from the Tanakama? The Tanakama says, boy, bekasher, boy, bepasul. Look at now. My tama hashta miyos hapasalu. In other words, Abaya is insisting that both of these Tanoim follow Shitas Rab Shimon. The Tanakama also follow Shitas Rab Shimon. El approach number 3. This is Gavaldik. We shech the Pesach the 14th in the afternoon. Right? The obligation of eating it only begins at night. What were to happen if someone breaks a bone on the 14th? Leman the Omar Kasher, it's Kasher. Leman the Omar Royal Achila. Now it's not Royal Achila. Gavaldik. It's good. From there on, Rebbe will always be more lenient. Says the Gemara Meisvei, we're going to challenge Abaya's interpretation. Nafkemina. It says in Abraisa, Rebbe Oimer, Nimnim al Moyach Shabarosh. This really is connected to the first Mishnah in today's daf. Every registrant needs at least one kezayis of basar. If many people are registered for the animal, you really have to make use of any part that is qualified as meat. What about brain? Parenthetically, brain is kosher l'shikha. A parenthesis in that it's known that one of our Rabbeim, I think the Rebbe Rashab, used to eat the moyach shabarosh, like he didn't know that someone says that the moyach shabarosh is kosher l'shikha, and someone told the Rebbe, it's a chiddush, like the Rebbe, isn't it kosher l'shikha? And from then on, he stopped eating it. But coming back over here, it's kosher. You can eat it. Nimna moyach shabarosh. Now hold on. You were not allowed to break the bones to get the meat, but there's a huge difference between the marrow in the head versus the marrow, let's say, in a thigh bone. The thigh bone is 360 closing the meat. We got a doctor here. To get to the brain, you don't have to crack the skull open. You can go through the nostril, and whatever you'll have to sort of say tear through those membranes, that's not halachic bone. Because you could extract the moyach shabarosh without breaking a bone. That's the key. So you can count the moyach shabarosh, says that's Rebbe. But the einim the moyach shabakul is you can't count the marrow in the thigh bone, even though it amounts to a kazayas or more, but you can never get to it, you can't count. Now asks the Gemara, moyach shabarosh my tama, because because you can pull it out, you can remove it without breaking a bone. Now we have a gavaldik kasha against you, Abaya. If you are right, Rebbe is more lenient than the Tanakama. Rebbe holds that on the 14th you can break bones. Now we have a problem. Why are we not allowed to count the moyach, the marrow in the thigh bone? No, let the registrant say, no, I'm going to eat the marrow. How do you get to it? Take it out before the night. Break the thigh bone during the 14th. Remove the marrow. And that should allow us to use that meat for one registrant.
Rabbi, if Rebbe holds you don't get malchus for whatever, something that's not royal achila, does that mean that lachatchila you could go and do it?
Clearly, very good. Okay, good. Clear. In other words, what we're learning over here is that sometimes when there's a machlekes, whether you chayv malchus or not, it doesn't mean whether it's okay or not. It's just whether it's a sin on the level that you chayv malchus. Clearly here not. Clearly here we're saying that you can do it lechatchila. If not, what's the kasha? What's the point? Amalach Abaya says, Abaya, hold on. I disagree with your question because according to you, even when it gets dark, if you don't, we're going to see about secondary worries. If no problem, break it for the lab of etzem leisishburuway lachatchila, you could do it, but there's another issue, and I'll prove it to you. Nami, what you think there's no way of getting the marrow out of the thigh bone without breaking the bone? He gives an example. Naisi gumarto, bring a fabrenta coal, bring a ember, bring a hot coal, and v'nechus alei, and place this hot coal on top of the bone, and v'nikla, it will burn a hole through it, and vaited v'nafka l'meichli, then you can get out the marrow. And therefore, v'nimna alei, you should still be allowed to register a person even without relying on breaking the bone on the 14th. And you're going to come and tell me, oh, burning through the bone is an isur. No, it is not. The hatanya avol hasoidev batzomis, if you burn open the bones, or v'hamachatech begidim, if you cut through hard sinews, whether sinews are basar or not, they are not bones. Ein boy mishum shvira soetz. Ella, this is all about Ella. So taka, why not? So there's another issue here, and interestingly, there's a machlekes hamoraim. Abaya says mishum peka. B'shek peka means is that when you put a hot coal, there is a fear that it might crack open. Burning through is okay, but when you apply a lot of heat to a bone, sometimes it can crack. If it will crack, it's as zeta, then you violate it. Rava says because of the hefsed kachim, because you're wasting part of a carbon. And listen, the bone you can't eat, maybe it means that the coal might burn through the marrow itself. The kokamasele biyodayim, right? Because you're ruining it with your, clear. Because you might burn through the marrow yourself. Now, not eating it.
Wouldn't the coal dry it out over time? If you're burning through a bone, by the time you get to the marrow, there's nothing left. It takes a long time.
You're the chef, not I, but it comes from over here. That's an ishtazoi. That when you have a freshly geshachten animal, if you're careful.
That's what it means you're wasting. You're wasting because by the time you get to the marrow, there's nothing left because you destroyed everything.
Okay, well, there was a havamina here. I think if you do it with a lot of caution, maybe you can salvage something. I just want to add to what you're saying, Samach. And what's the other side? What's the alternative? To do nothing. To do nothing is the worst. To do nothing is nicer. That's why the Gemara is emphasizing at least you're not doing it be a dime. No, it's not touching it. Okay, it's going to become nicer, but you didn't do it be a dime. If you're going to try to do it to salvage a drop, you might be a dime, ruin everything. Dilma, achal nura mimayach didei. So, what's the point? The point is that just like we see that we can't use the moyach in the thigh bone because of exera, so even if Abaya is going to say, Taka on the 14th, Rebbe, you are allowed to break it. Still, we make exera. People don't want anyone to notice anyone breaking any bones in the Pesach. Not everyone is going to know the lumdus. It's on the 14th. It's not roy la'achila. So Abaya is not refuted, but nevertheless, approach number 4. Papa Amen. Kol kei gavno. Kol kei gavno means he's opining on the prior topic. What's the prior topic? Are you allowed to break the bone on the 14th or not? You know what he's going to say? Kula alma yesh boy mishum shira so'etzem. The Tanakama and Rabbi, they hold you're not allowed to do it. Rabbi learns it from the juxtaposition of Babayis echod yei ochel, and on the 14th, now it's not edible. Let's go back to what we learned on the first part of today's daf, my comma, the first white line, because lo urta mechazei la'achila. So gavaldik. This is Ravina Ravashi with the Chachma, how they put everything together. It's now that we established on Amud Aleph that Rabbi Yechanan retracted. Rabbi Yechanan en neshlakish lebasar besoif azlinan. So same thing over here. Even though now it's not edible, when you look at something, never look at it in the little narrow now moment. Look at it future-oriented. So now it's called Yeyachel. And therefore the lav applies. And that already answers the Braisa completely. So that's why the kul is. However, Ella, again, we're up to approach number 4. Ella, that we have the psul yoitza by a Pesach. What's the psul yoitza? Chaymais Yerushalayim. What happens if someone takes a limb, part of the limb left the walls of Yerushalayim, it projected outside the boundary, and part of it remained inside. So man the Amar Kashar, which is the Tanakama, Ha Kashar, who the limb The part that's inside, that part is kosher. And therefore, if you want to break the bone, you may not. Boy, be kosher. Which is the additional kula of Rabbi, since Hai Lav Bar Achilohu Kid the Tanya Rabbi Shmuel Benoy Shal Rabbi Chaim that Ever Shiyatza Miktsasoi, he also agrees there's no prohibition to break the bone. It's amazing. In other words, so how would you get the meat off without breaking the bone? You would scrape, according to the Tanakh, you would have to scrape the meat off. Guys, like this, the part of the meat and the bone that left may not be consumed. The part of the meat that always remained in Yerushalayim, according to the Tanakh, the way you will get it off the bone is by scraping it off the bone. You may not break it. Rabbi is understanding that not only does the boy limit the lav, but the smichos adds to the limitation. So when we're adding this also. You can even break it. Okay. I disagree with that. Just because Rebbe has a juxtaposition to Royal Achila, you can still say there's a problem. The moment you are wanting to, or you are addressing the bone that left, or that part that left, that part is also possible. The high aver hapasalu. So you can break it. Okay, everyone agrees you can break it. Ella, approach number 6. Shvira su'etzem binah. Chevra al toichel memenu nah. Must make ma partially roasted. Now what happens if the Koren Pesach is right now only partially roasted? Right now you can't eat it. Now it's unlike the case we had before of the kulis on the 14th. Without doing anything, time will take you into the 15th. Here, it's like interesting. As it is right now, you may not eat it. You're not allowed to eat it partially roasted. But if you were to continue to roast it, you have to do something. Then it will become properly roasted. Oh, ikebenayu. That what? Man, the Amar Kasher, this is the Tanakh. Kasher who? It's called a Kasher to Koren Pesach. It's called a Kasher to Koren Pesach. It's not puzzle. Just because you can't eat it doesn't make it puzzle. Right? Continue roasting it. The Rebbe's adding from the smichos, man the Amar Royal Achila, hashte'ena Royal Achila. We said before that l'urta, that we look at the future, but here it's not just waiting. Here you have to actually continue to roast it. So here you're not going to look at the future. But here you understand why people will argue with the 6th approach. Because it says the Gemara, Nachman by Yitzchak Amar, Kol kahai gavna oichet, yesh boy mishum shviras uetzem. Even Rebbe will hold its asr. You can't eat it right now. It's in the fire, or even if it's out of the fire, you put it back in the fire. It's fit to become edible. Not the way it is right now, but the matvele, roast it, and v'achale. So elo shvira, so Aliyah ikebenayu. The machlekes is regarding breaking the bone in the tail. What did we learn? Mamish Daf Gimel. Right? What did we learn in the beginning? That a goat has no tail, but the lamb that has a fatty tail, the Aliyah is put on the mizbeach. Here's the question: is the lav of the burning of the bone only on those parts that are edible for humans, for the Yidden, or do we also apply that lav on that which goes on the mizbeach? Lamando Amar kasheru kasheru. Can't say it's possible. Fakert, it's even holier. It's going to go achilas mizbeach. Lamando Amar Rebbe, who adds roy lachila. As we learned above, the Aliyah ligavoya salka, because the tail goes on the altar. Says the Gemara Ravashi Yomar, no, kolki I gavno, vaday ein boy mishum shvira. So that's no one, no, even the Tanakh would be lenient, because the havaday ein roy lachila, and even the Tanakh will agree that the isur is only limited to the parts that are designated for achila of the Jew. Elo Zakt Ravashi, approach number 7. Ever she'ein olav kezayis basar ikebenayu. What happens if there's a limb, but you don't have a kezayis basar on this limb? Man, the Amar kasher, it's kasher. You can't fulfill your mitzvah only eating the meat of that bone, but you can't say it's puzzle. So then you're going to be chayiv malchus. Rebbe, Laman the Amar royal achila, bo'inan shiur Haroy lachila on this bone, and since this bone doesn't have it, therefore you won't be chayiv malchus. And now the final Ravina Amar.
Rabbi, does that mean that if you had like on a steak, you ate all the meat off the bone, and what's left is not a kazayas? At that point, it doesn't apply anymore.
Look, it can be then, because then we'll go back to the thigh bone. It means that if there is a limb that nistama as a beria, as it is in its natural state, it never had a kazayas basar on it. And you have to know halachically what part of the animal is considered a bone. You have to know how to count the ramachi varim. The ramachi varim is by people. I know that, but just know how to make where does a bone begin, where does a bone end. Now, Ravina Omar, everyone will agree because they were in on shiur achila. Even the Tanach kosher means this bone can be eaten, not the bone, the meat on the bone. Ella, the final approach. There is a bone. That aver, this bone has in its totality a kazayas of meat, but it's not all in one location. So in one part of the bone, there is no kazayas. You want to now break the bone in the area where there is not a kazayas basar, or maybe Danny where there was never a kazayas basar. That's the machlokes. Lamanda Amar kasheru ha kasheru. Again, Rebbe, it's all based on the fact that when Rebbe adds the smichos, he's adding a limitation. He's adding a leniency. So these are the 8 approaches that we have amongst the Amoraim, and now we found the Braisa that mentions 4 of the 8. This is not a kasha on the other 4, but stam Tanya kavos ka'arba minayu. And the Tanya, Rebbe Yomer. Here, and then it says ve'etzem lo yisishbru boy ala kasheru chayiv ve'eina chayiv al haposel. This is all Rebbe. Here you see that Rebbe holds of both. And what is Rebbe saying? So now the Braisa will give examples of Rebbe's leniency of the areas where Rebbe will hold you're not chayiv malchus. Number 1. The first example that the Braisa gives is our number 2. I'm just going to go through. We know we had 8 numbers. And what was that? But the nifso, the shas achila, ein by mishum shvira so'etzem. That's number 2. That's Rebbe. In other words, without the juxtaposition, that was approach number 2. The Tanach holds like Rabbi Yaakov. If something had a shas HaKosher, even after it becomes possible, there's still malchus. Rebbe is the one that says, right now, you can't eat it. You're good, no malchus. Another example the Braisa gives: the yesh b'shir achila, yesh b'mishum shira so'etzem. Ein b'shir achila, ein b'mishum shira so'etzem. L'chayda, that's the 8th approach. Gavaldik. The leniency of Rebbe. If here there isn't a shir achila, then you can break it. Another example the Braisa gives: Horoy lamazbeach. Which goes on the Aliyah. That was our approach number 6. And now the final one in the Braisa, b'shas achila, only at the time designated for eating. And however, shalei b'shas achila, right? But not the shas achila, which is on the 14th. Approach number 3. So the Braisa gave our 2863 nekuda. Now we're going to learn the final machlokes. Yes.
Rabbi, according to Rebbe or to Tanach, if when there is malchus, if someone broke the bone, can you eat the Pesach or not? When there is malchus,
l'chayda, you can eat it, but that's something that you have to see inside. I don't see how that would disqualify the meat altogether. Okay, now itmer. It was stated. Here we have a machlokes Amoraim, and before we even learn the machlokes, just look inside the last Tosfos in the Amud. That Tosfos quotes the Riva, that this Itmar is on the Shita of Rebbe. Don't forget, Rebbe was the one that's more lenient regarding shiur achila or no shiur achila. Rebbe will be the one that in a certain case will say you won't be chayiv malchus. We're speaking about the kazayas of basar on a bone. Now let's read the Gemara inside. Aver she'ein all of kazayis basar b'makom zeh. Now we know what Ravina said. Fine, but we're going to see that not everyone agrees. And all of this is Lashitas Rebbe. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Yesh Boy Mishum Shviras U'etzem. I don't care. In the totality, there's a kazayis of basar. You break the bone, you're chayiv. Hashem Elakish says, Nisht Ein Boy Mishum Shviras U'etzem. In other words, the Shlakish holds that for you to be chayiv malchus, there has to be a kazayis basar in the place or on the place of the breakage. Says the Gemara, Esvei Rabbi Yochanan Hashem Elakish, you are more lenient. If you don't have a kazayis basar on this location, you're telling me that you're not chayiv malchus. State in Abraisa, the etzem lesishbru boy, right? Echad etzem sheyesh olav kazayis basar. The echad etzem that doesn't have a kazayis basar, you will always be chayiv. Now hold on, my ein olav kazayis basar. Does this Braisa mean ilema the ein olav kazayis basar klal that it never naturally had a kazayis basar? That can't be. That's the basis of the question. Amai yesh by mishum shvira so etzem. Everyone agrees that some part of the bone has to have a kazayis basar. Eloma, that's the case of the Braisa. Elavachi kamar echad etzem sheyesh olav kazayis basar v'markim zeh. Ve'echad she'ein olav v'markim zeh. But since the yesh olav kazayis v'markim acher, you will be chayiv. The reason why we don't have, you see on the side, kasha l'Rab Shimon Lakish, is because in our version, Rabbi Yochanan is talking to Reish Lakish. We're just recording that conversation. You don't have to add anything. Kasha on Reish Lakish. So now the Gemara is going to quote the answer that Reish Lakish gave Rabbi Yochanan. So Amar le daf pehei loy hachi kamar echad etzam sheyesh olav kazayis basar mibachutz. How do you count the kazayis basar? So you have basar outside of the bone, and then you have marrow inside of the bone. The echad etzem she'ein olav kazayis basar mibachutz. But since the yesh olav kazayis basar mibafnim, but where Reish Lakish stands his ground that if you break a bone on a place where there is no kazayis basar, you're not going to be chayiv malchus. All what this Braisa is adding, a chumrah, which won't contradict Reish Lakish, is that even if outside of the bone, in the outside, there is no kazayis basar, but if in this place, inside the bone, there is marrow and all of it together amounts to a kazayis, then you're going to be chayiv. The point is that all of the kazayis has to be in the place of the breakage. Because if there is kazayis basar outside in a different location, if there is marrow in this same bone in a different location, the Shlakish holds his ground that here, if there's no kazayis basar atodah, then you're not going to be chayiv. And we'll stop over here because it's a long brayso. V'hatanya is not a kasha. V'hatanya is a binichusa to prove that when we speak about the kazayis basar, we don't look about the kazayis basar only outside, that we count the marrow as kazayis basar in the bone, upon which there's going to be a lav that, again, according to the Shlakish, in this location, you may not break the bone. To be continued.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Have a great day.
Yes, correct. I want to go back to Shleim. I want to find out what you just said. Some of the Rishonim have to speak about it. That if someone violated, we had before Machlokes Rishonim, we spoke about Rashi Tosfos. Trying to remember earlier in the Masechta that if someone violated something, question is he yoitzer or not? Remember where that was? That was mamash way in the beginning. It's going to come to me. There was a violation for something. There was a machlokes with Rashi Tosfos. Whether it invalidated.
Violating only b'mezid, Rabbi. For sure not.
I don't know. We have to see all that. That has to be discussed. That's well about them. You're right. I also think that way, but we have to find that.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Have a good day, Chavra.